In the next few videos, we're going to be talking about group policy. So let's talk about what group policy does. Group policy is a way that we can set up how our users on our domain or on your local computer can interact with the system. For example, does the user have access to the control panel? Does the user have access to the registry? What programs are required to be installed on that system? Or even the password policies. Do you have to use a complex password, for example? Those are all set in group policy. You can even set things like the background theme and picture that's on the screen. So if you have an organization, for example, you can set up group policy throughout your domain so that all of the computers have the same background, maybe your company logo. That way you don't worry about your users putting, say, rude or inappropriate screens on their background, because you can control that as the administrator. Well, there are a couple of areas of group policy. There's local group policy, and then there's domain group policy. Right now I'm on a client machine, and so let's look at the local group policy. I'm going to get to it through gpedit.msc. Now normally I could just click this and go to it, but since I'm on a domain, I actually have to open this as an administrator, and I'll have to put the credentials of a domain admin on here. Administrator. And we should be able to go into local group policy. So these are group policies that exist on this client machine and that are in charge of this client machine. You notice there are computer configurations and user configurations. So those things that have control over this particular computer, and those things that have control over this particular user. And if I just click down here, you'll see, for example, here's under administrative templates, control panel. Here's where I could prohibit access to the control panel and PC settings. So that's all done here through the local group policy. Now let me switch over to a domain controller, and let's take a look at the domain group policies. I'm going to open up the tools, and I'm going to go down to group policy management. Here in Group Policy Management, I can set up group policies. I haven't done it yet, but I could set up group policies here. And let me see if I can find where I might do that. Create a group policy, new group policy object, and then I will edit that group policy. And you'll see something similar, not exactly the same, but similar to the local group policy, where I can set up policies against computers and against certain users. All right, so I'm going to delete that group policy for now, because we're going to be doing this a little bit later. Group policies are applied to, well, you've already seen that they can be applied to a local machine if they're created on that local machine. They can also be created on a site, or against a site, a domain, or an organizational unit. Notice that group policy is not applied against a group. It's applied against a local machine, a site, a domain, or an OU. Group policy comes in objects. When I created this, you notice it says create GPO, group policy object. Now that object, when I create it, may have many different group policies in it. So I can have a list of objects and then apply those objects. And we'll talk about the order in which they're applied later on. Most policies have 3 different settings in them. Let's take a look at one of the policies here. Let's go back in and edit this one again. And let me see, I'm going to go down to user, admin, desktop, and let's just choose one of these. So you see we have not configured, enabled, and disabled. And you have to pay attention to the help here to find out exactly what they do. So it says if you enable this setting, the computer is hidden on the desktop. the Start menu, the Explorer folder tree, and so on. If you disable it, the computer is displayed as usual, appearing as normal. If you do not configure the setting, the default is to display the computer as usual. So in this case, not configured is the same as disabled. And if you enable it, then these things disappear from the desktop and so on. So you have to kind of read the help in order to figure out how those work. Now, one last thing I want to mention is once I create a group policy, how do I push it out? How do I make sure that everybody immediately gets that policy? Well, I'm going to go to the command line here, to a command prompt, and I'm going to type gp update space /force. And now you can see it says updating policy. It's now pushing that out to my entire domain. It won't take very long. In this case, it'll only take a few seconds, and it says now that it's done. So that will force my users to get that new policy. Otherwise, we'll see later on that for computer policies, it is applied as soon as that computer is turned on. And for user policies, it's applied when that user logs into a computer.